Hello to all our beloved Manhwa fans. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Before we dive in, I want to send a very special shout out to everyone who left comments on the previous video. A big hug to all our loyal followers. And a special greeting goes to I Say Guts 3, who was the quickest to leave the first comment last time. Thank you so much. Now, without further delay, let's jump into this exciting recap. That night, Kim returned to his room after showering and lay down on his bed, fully aware that nothing unusual had happened that day. His soul didn't seem affected by anything, to the point where he began to wonder if the events from the day before had just been a dream. He kept thinking that their outing was a positive experience, but when he remembered the mass they shared, he couldn't help but blush. He knew that what they had done wasn't exactly proper, and that Sooyeon had made the effort to go out with him on what was basically a one-day date. This made him question why he was still holding on to her. It was clear Sooyeon had done it out of kindness, and going out together didn't really make sense when he looked at it objectively. Even if they did somehow end up dating, everything would become complicated, especially with Seolha, who could easily destroy him. Though the idea bothered him, there wasn't much he could do. Plus, the university semester was about to resume, so his best option was to focus on his studies. However, just then, something clicked. He realized he had forgotten the date. He checked his phone and then immediately rushed to his computer. He had completely forgotten to re-enroll for the new semester because of his date with Sooyeon. For him, this was a disaster, as the deadline had passed the day before. The next morning, Kim looked exhausted, unsure of what to do. His semester would be put on a forced break. Even after calling the university, they told him it was his mistake, and nothing could be done. Given the cost of living, he would have to continue working part-time. What worried him most was whether his boss had already found someone to replace him. If she hadn't, maybe he could stay for a few more months. But then he imagined Siola and Sooyeon scolding him for breaking his promise that this would be his last week. So staying wasn't really an option either. He was sure it would cause a huge misunderstanding, so the best option seemed to be finding a different job, even if it would be more difficult. Still, he had to admit that training a new employee would be a hassle for his boss, so continuing to work there might actually benefit both of them. Suddenly, he scolded himself for thinking that way. Deep down, the truth was he just wanted to keep working with his boss a bit longer. It even made him wonder if he was turning into one of those clingy, toxic guys. Just then, Sooyeon approached him and asked if something was wrong, as his reaction was so off that it had startled her. Embarrassed, Kim insisted that everything was fine, but she didn't believe him. She noticed several food trays had been carelessly prepped and barely any were selling. For her, 5 portions were more than enough. So the fact that he made such a mistake meant something was clearly off, and she wanted to know what it was. With no way out, Kim told her the truth. When Sooyeon heard what had happened, she was shocked he had forgotten something so important. Kim explained he tried to re-enroll the day before, but found out the deadline had passed a day earlier. Sooyeon paused, trying to recall what day he meant. And then it hit her. Kim hadn't re-enrolled because they had gone on a date. He tried to deny it awkwardly, but in his mind, Kim knew it wasn't entirely untrue. Still, he assured Sooyeon not to worry. Once a replacement arrived, he would leave right away. He was convinced someone else had already taken the job. But then, Sooyeon, clearly a bit flustered, admitted she actually hadn't found anyone yet. Since they were already talking about it, she suggested he stay on for a few more months. There was no need to make things complicated by looking for a new job, especially if he could keep doing something he already knew well. Kim figured she had a point, though in his mind, he wondered if she really hadn't found a replacement yet. Then, with a bit of nervousness, she asked him if he could continue working there just a little longer. That made Kim flinch, and in a sudden impulse, he said maybe he should just drop out of college and get hired full-time. Sooyeon quickly decided it was best to end the conversation there and get back to work. Kim felt a little silly for saying that. She didn't seem to have any hidden intentions, and he was probably just overthinking things. But in Sooyeon's head, she realized she might be in trouble. She had spoken without thinking, caught up in the moment. Now it felt awkward to suddenly ask him to leave, especially since she hadn't found a replacement yet and had no excuse. Plus, she knew that Kim missed his university deadline because of her. That said, she had to admit he did a great job at work. What really worried her was that every time she saw him, she remembered what happened that time and couldn't focus. Her original intention had just been to go on a simple date. Nothing more. Sure, she had worn her cutest outfit just in case, but that didn't matter anymore. The truth was, the day before had almost given her a heart attack. It was hard to avoid Kim now, and she would have to deal with this for another 6 months. What frustrated her more was that Kim didn't seem affected at all. It made her wonder if guys these days really didn't care about this kind of thing. Kim noticed her staring at him, and Sooyeon quickly turned away, not knowing what to do. Later that night, at home, Sooyeon stood in the shower, sighing and thinking she'd nearly died at work. She questioned whether she was overreacting just because they'd shared a mass together, but she also knew she wasn't some teenager anymore. In the end, she was the only one still obsessing over it. Kim clearly wasn't. Now wasn't the time to worry about something like that. The best thing to do was forget it quickly. But then, out of nowhere, she felt the urge to sing. So she did. Then she stopped and asked herself what she was doing. She felt completely crazy. Why had she suddenly started singing? Was she losing her mind? The next day, Kim went to work as usual, but nothing seemed to be going right. He had the distinct feeling that his boss was purposely avoiding him. When he invited her to get ice cream, she declined. Even when he asked her if he had cooked a dish properly, she approved it without hesitation. Even though everything seemed normal on the surface, Kim felt there was something off. He wondered if maybe he should stop pushing things, but he also understood how hard it must be for her to know an employee saw her as more than just a boss. So what was he supposed to do now? He figured it was time to try one last time. He called out to Sooyeon and said he wasn't sure if the grilled mackerel was fully cooked. He asked her to check it, saying she was the kind of person who could tell just by looking. Even though he had his doubts, Sooyeon insisted that if he really couldn't tell, he should just say so directly. Kim reassured her that he wasn't faking insecurity. Serving undercooked food would be a serious issue. She understood the importance of it and walked over to inspect it. After a glance, she said it was cooked well, though if it stayed on the grill a little longer, it would be perfect. While she evaluated it, Kim didn't take his eyes off her for a second. Sooyeon noticed and asked if he needed anything else or had another question. He shook his head, but deep down, he felt like she had been avoiding being near him lately. That's when he asked her directly if working together made her uncomfortable. Nervously, Sooyeon answered that it didn't bother her at all. Still, Kim wanted an honest answer and told her he would accept whatever she said. She insisted again that it wasn't the case, but her face was so red she could barely speak. Gathering a bit of courage, though clearly flustered, she admitted it just made her feel a little embarrassed as she covered her face. Kim was speechless. He had no idea what she meant by embarrassed. For a second, he even worried he had his zipper open or something. But it wasn't that. Then she asked him if it really didn't bother him at all, clearly referring to what had happened that day. It took Kim a moment to catch on, but once he remembered what happened on their date, he felt just as embarrassed. Finally, he explained that it wasn't that it didn't matter to him, but that he was trying to act normal because he was afraid she might end up hating him. Sooyeon understood, but Kim kept going. He had honestly thought she didn't care about what happened, but now he could see she had been thinking about it this whole time. Hearing that, she lowered her head and confirmed it. She apologized, saying it was her who brought the whole thing up, and in the end, she was the one still worried about it. She felt a bit silly. Kim didn't think it was silly at all. Still, Sooyeon admitted that even if she didn't mean to, every time she saw him, the memory of that day came rushing back. That left Kim speechless again. But at least part of him felt relieved. He had assumed his boss didn't want anything to do with him anymore, but that had never been the case. So he asked her directly, why would she even want to avoid him in the first place? A heavy silence settled between them, and Kim couldn't really make sense of the mood. So he finally asked her if maybe it would just be best for him to quit, like he originally planned. But Sooyeon immediately rejected the idea. If he left, the whole business would fall apart. Besides, she had already taken down the job posting for a part-time worker. Then suddenly, her expression changed. Frustrated, she told him to just do whatever he wanted, and she was so upset she refused to talk to him for the rest of the day. Thinking back, Sooyeon had snapped, asking what kind of guy takes a girl to a fantasy town on a first date. Then, just like that, she called Kim a pervert. That caught him completely off guard. The whole conversation had flipped in an instant. Clearly, it was just a huge misunderstanding. Later, while working, Kim couldn't stop thinking about how much Sooyeon had actually been stressing about what happened. He hadn't even considered it, but now he wondered if he should talk to her. In the end, he decided to apologize. However, before he could say anything, Sooyeon reminded him that she had told him not to talk to her. Still, Kim had finally built up the courage. This had gone too far to leave things unresolved. So, without beating around the bush, he asked her if they really couldn't just be a couple. Sooyeon was completely stunned. Kim wanted her to understand. She'd only agreed to go out with him because he was quitting. But now that he was staying, if things were going to be awkward anyway, wouldn't it be better to just start dating? If they were in a relationship, there'd be no reason to feel embarrassed about what had happened. He knew he was being forward, but if they were going to keep working in such a tense atmosphere, it made more sense to either be together or call it quits. However, he then wondered if Sooyeon was really considering the idea, or if what she truly feared was that rejecting him would make him quit without hesitation. He knew that putting pressure on her wasn't right, but just this once, he needed to know. So, looking straight at her, he confessed that he liked her, and as he spoke those words, he slowly began leaning in to kiss her. Sooyeon, for her part, couldn't believe what was happening. The feeling was exactly the same as what she experienced that day. Even so, she knew she had to pull away. She couldn't let it happen again. But seeing how confident Kim was, she couldn't stop wondering what it would be like to just let the kiss happen. Still, she shook the thought away and pushed him back with a quick slap. Suddenly, she shouted at him, asking how he dared take advantage of the situation while they were at work. She hadn't expected Kim to be so bold and couldn't understand what was going through his mind. How could he try to kiss her out of nowhere? Did he really expect her to just go along with it, even after she had clearly said their date would be a one-time thing? She was also annoyed that he would attempt something like that in such a place. What if customers had started arriving? To Kim, it was a shame. He had honestly thought he was getting through to her. Something in what he said had made Sooyeon blush, and when she started hitting him while asking if anything she said made sense to him, Kim just laughed and replied that it was a joke. Deep down, though, he was happy to hear her talking like that. It felt like the old Sooyeon was back. As he'd mentioned before, he really liked working with her and didn't mind whether she accepted his feelings or not. That's why he told her not to worry so much. But Sooyeon knew he was lying. Even if he said it seriously, his words didn't match how he really felt. Still blushing, she asked what that glowing light was. Kim had no idea why the chalice had started to shine all of a sudden, or if it had anything to do with how close they were standing. He tried to brush it off, saying it was nothing important, but Sooyeon kept pressing him, asking if it was somehow her fault. Kim didn't even understand what she meant, while Sooyeon tried to figure out if the light had something to do with her. Soon after, they closed up the shop and went to another place to avoid being interrupted. There, Kim spoke honestly and told her she didn't need to get involved, but Sooyeon wanted to know if he was really planning to back out despite the fact that the glow was so obvious. Kim felt like they still had work to do, but she didn't quite understand what he meant. To her, it was weird that her coworker expected a sacred ceremony with her. Still, she trusted that helping him would make things better. Meanwhile, Kim couldn't help but wonder what she was planning. Before he could say anything, Sooyeon took the chalice without asking, determined to take responsibility for the situation, especially since she didn't understand her own actions either. Although it was clear she was focused entirely on cleaning the chalice, Kim realized that if she continued with that method, they could actually collect the holy water. With no better option, he decided to help her. He took Sooyeon's hands in his and guided her to clean the chalice properly. Even though the situation made her a little embarrassed, she didn't pull away. In Kim's mind, none of it made sense. He didn't know why he was helping Sooyeon clean the chalice, but if they wanted to get the holy water, there was no other choice. And being so close to her, hearing her breathing and feeling that warmth in his heart, it changed everything. He warned her that the holy water was about to spill out. Without knowing what to do, Sooyeon tried to cover it with her hand, though she only ended up splashing herself a bit. Even without fully understanding what was happening, Kim realized he somehow enjoyed it. Sooyeon asked him if that was all, and he nodded. Still, she wanted to make sure they had collected every drop of the holy water. Once Kim confirmed it, she told him to gather everything and clean up the spill. Then, without saying another word, she rushed out, leaving Kim completely puzzled. On the other hand, Sooyeon felt something strange stirring inside her. Her heart was racing, and it was as if the corruption in her soul was starting to overflow, like she was sweating from within. She recalled the moment she had wanted to participate in a sacred ceremony, something that happened during their date, and now she didn't even know how to react. All she had intended was to help Kim solve the glowing issue so he could focus on work, but what they had just done brought back vivid memories of that day. She couldn't believe she was now feeling the urge to pray. Looking down at the cloth she used to wipe the holy water, she wondered if helping him had really been worth it. In that moment, she remembered the warmth she had felt in her heart. Still, she didn't want to waste more time thinking about these things. That's when Kim suddenly appeared, asking what she was doing just standing there, startling her. He noticed her flushed face and asked if she was okay. Flustered, Sooyeon lied and said it was nothing, but Kim kept looking at her with concern, suspecting she might have caught a cold. Realizing how close he was, she instinctively told him to back off, insisting that she was fine. But just then, Loud banging sounds interrupted them. Sooyeon wondered who it could be. She was sure she'd left the sign saying the store was closed. She didn't understand why someone would be making so much noise. At first, she thought it might be a difficult customer, but it turned out to be Seolha, standing at the door with a rather sour expression. That afternoon, when Seolha entered, she asked if it was true that they had closed the store because of a flood of orders. For a moment, Kim lied, saying they did it to prevent someone from walking in by mistake. Sooyeon quickly added that the noise startled her, and she thought the door might break. She even joked that her daughter could be very energetic. But Kim noticed how energetic Sooyeon herself looked while working. Seolha, however, didn't care what her mother did in the shop. Her real issue was with him. She asked Kim if he didn't think he was getting a bit too close to her mom. It seemed inappropriate to be talking that closely while working, especially since no one was around to interrupt. It gave the impression they were a little too close. Even though Sooyeon didn't deny it, Seolha implied Kim had convinced her mother to close the door on purpose, something he didn't understand right away. He explained that he had only approached Sooyeon because her face was red, and he wanted to check if she was okay, especially since the flu had been going around. Sooyeon confirmed she was fine and told them not to worry. Still, Seolha reached out to touch her mom's forehead and confirmed it was indeed warm, though there was no fever. Sooyeon insisted again that she was just tired from work. That's when Seolha noticed a strange smell in the air. She leaned in toward her mom and said she could sense a peculiar scent, the same one that lingered on Kim. The boy tried to explain that it was from a strong-smelling ingredient, which Sooyeon backed up by saying she had been helping him with it. But Seolha remained skeptical. They had never used that ingredient before, and she hadn't seen it on the menu either. Kim explained he was thinking of adding it as part of a new dish, though she didn't seem very convinced. Even so, he reaffirmed his intention, although in his mind, he feared that if the truth came out, it would be over for him. Luckily, Seolha didn't press further, and instead asked her mom again if she was really okay. For Kim, this was a relief, even though he still didn't understand the suspicious look she kept giving him. Then Seolha noticed the cloth Sooyeon had in her hand and asked about it. Her mother explained she used it to wipe down a table and asked Kim to throw it away. He did so immediately, but his overly quick reaction only deepened Seolha's suspicion. Sooyeon then asked her daughter why she had come all the way there and if she needed anything. Seolha said she was on her way to the supermarket, but after seeing the door closed, she got curious. She also admitted she didn't want to see Kim's face again, especially after he said he'd quit and yet had the nerve to come back. For Kim, there was a good reason behind his return, but Seolha was convinced he had only come back to try and win her mother over. She even hinted that he had delayed his return to university just for her. However, Sooyeon scolded her, not understanding why she was speaking that way to someone who had been working so hard. She reminded her that she was the one who asked Kim to stay and keep helping them, and that Seolha herself knew how difficult it was to find a good part-time job. Still, Seolha remained convinced it was all part of a bigger plan. She was sure Kim was hiding his true intentions. Even so, Sooyeon didn't give it too much thought and simply advised her to be careful with bad intentions too. She wished her a safe trip home and asked her to be cautious, as she had to reopen the shop soon. Seolha, still concerned, told her to call if anything happened, and before leaving, reminded her not to mess up the orders. Once she left, Kim and Sooyeon remained silent, but both finally felt they could breathe. Their hearts were pounding like crazy. Kim commented that Seolha's sudden arrival had really caught him off guard, and Sooyeon admitted she felt like she had lost 10 years of her life from the scare. Still, they were relieved Seolha didn't notice what was really going on. Kim, however, couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if she had. Sooyeon didn't hesitate. Seolha would have destroyed him on the spot. Trying to change the subject, Kim asked if they should reopen the shop, and Sooyeon nodded. That night, after a long day of work, Sooyeon congratulated Kim on his effort, and he appreciated the gesture. In his mind, he thought back to the conversation with Seolha earlier. After that, customers started arriving and they couldn't continue talking. Honestly, that was a relief for him, as things had started to feel a little too tense. When Sooyeon asked if he wasn't forgetting anything, Kim just nodded without thinking much of it. But then she told him she hoped he wouldn't try anything like he did that day again. She had only allowed it that time. Kim, unsure what she meant exactly, simply said it wouldn't happen again. For Sooyeon, though, after hearing what Seolha had said earlier, things suddenly made more sense, which left Kim feeling a bit embarrassed. Later that night, still feeling a bit confused, Kim anonymously searched online to see what people thought about dating a single mom who was also their part-time boss. He received both positive and negative responses, and although he didn't fully understand some of the replies, It was pretty much what he expected from the internet. Still, he wondered what he was hoping to gain from the search. He didn't even know what to do next, or what his boss might be thinking at that moment. On the other hand, Sooyeon had also been looking online. She searched whether anyone had ever dated an employee while already having a daughter. But as soon as she realized what she was doing, she questioned herself. What was she trying to achieve? She didn't even understand her own feelings anymore. From different places, both were thinking the same thing. What was supposed to happen now? The next day, Kim arrived at work half asleep but optimistic that nothing strange would happen. However, he noticed his boss was taking longer than usual to arrive. Just as he was getting ready to start the day, someone walked in. He greeted them, but when he looked up, he realized it wasn't Sooyeon. It was Seolha. Panic hit him immediately. Why was she there? Was it related to what happened the day before? Had they not handled the situation well? His first thought was that Siola had figured everything out and had come earlier than her mom to beat him up. He had no idea if he should stay or just run. At that moment, Siola noticed his uneasy expression and asked if he had something to say. Nervously, Kim replied that it was nothing. Without paying much attention to him, she told him to move aside so she could come in. Kim stepped aside, still visibly confused, trying to hide his nerves. He mentioned that the boss hadn't arrived yet. Siola didn't seem to care much. She just continued getting ready. When she finished, she asked Kim what her first task should be. That left him even more confused. He had no idea what was going on or what Siola was referring to. Seeing his puzzled expression, Siola asked if Sooyeon hadn't told him anything. Then she explained that her mom had to attend the funeral of a family acquaintance and that she would be filling in temporarily. For Kim, that explained everything. Now it made sense. But in his mind, all he could think about was whether he'd be working with Siola from now on. Meanwhile, with her arms crossed, Siola stared at him and asked, "Aren't you going to say anything?" Kim went to the restroom to call his boss, wondering why she hadn't even left him a message. It had given him quite the scare. Sooyeon apologized, explaining that she had rushed out after receiving the news that morning and was just about to message him. Now Kim understood that she was already aware of the situation, but the real problem was that Siola was there with him. Still, for Sooyeon, Siola was just a stand-in until she could return. Fortunately, she had the day off. That wasn't exactly what Kim wanted to hear, but he figured he could handle things for the day. He still wondered if they could really work together alone. To Sooyeon, there was no doubt they could. Two people were better than one, and she even saw it as a good chance for them to become friends. She joked that there's a fine line between love and hate. Even so, she asked him to hang in there until she got back, and promised to reward him if he did. Kim didn't know what kind of reward she meant. He wasn't a kid, but he agreed anyway. He assured her not to worry and that he'd take care of everything. Sooyeon thanked him and ended the call. Kim sighed, already feeling like he was slowly going insane. A little while later, Siola asked Kim how long he planned to stay in the bathroom. He apologized, explaining he'd just finished, but since he was taking too long, she had started preparing a batch of marinated radishes. Kim, however, had already made them. Still, he was surprised that she knew how to prepare them. To Siola, it was nothing unusual. After all, the store was named after her. That made Kim think that maybe working together wouldn't be so bad. Siola had worked there as a kid, so it made sense. Curious, he tried a bit of what she had made, but noticed it didn't taste right. When Kim commented on it, he asked if she didn't think it was a bit bland and suggested maybe she had used too much salt. Siola didn't respond right away, but eventually said that it wasn't good to eat salty food anyway. Kim didn't quite understand that logic and offered to take care of the rest, but first asked if she could peel an egg. Offended, she asked if he thought she was that useless. So he handed her the eggs from the kitchen, something she would handle. Kim figured side dishes might be a bit tricky for her, so something simple would be enough. What surprised him most, though, was how she followed his instructions without complaining. He had expected her to scold him. Then he remembered what Sooyeon had said. Maybe this was a chance to get closer. Suddenly, a noise caught his attention. He turned to make sure she was just peeling eggs, only to see that she had cracked one open and eaten it, saying it was perfect and hard to peel. Kim sighed and decided to finish the rest himself. Then he asked her to transfer another dish into a container, which she agreed to do. But he wasn't sure she'd get it right. Even if she messed it up, it wasn't a big deal. Just pouring something into another bowl was easy enough for a child. Still, he couldn't understand how she had managed to mangle the eggs instead of peeling them. He'd have to boil more. Things were getting complicated. When Siola finally finished her task, Kim looked over and noticed she had spilled way too much. She didn't even bother making an excuse. He pointed out that although some of it spilled, the left container looked full while the right one was practically empty. Siola remained quiet and explained that sometimes orders came in that excluded unnecessary ingredients. Kim didn't fully buy it, but even after saying something that absurd, Siola kept filling the containers without missing a beat. In his mind, he knew it was completely normal for someone who didn't know how to cook, but that made him wonder how the boss and her daughter had been able to run the business on their own. Even though he was now handling most things, he at least hoped Siola would help with the simpler tasks. Just then, a new order came in. A moment later, Kim approached her and told her he would take care of the rest, but asked if she could handle that order. Siola agreed, though it struck him as odd that she followed his request without arguing. A little while later, Kim finally felt he could breathe. He admitted Siola was efficient, as long as she was told exactly what to do. He had expected her to act independently and ignore him, but that wasn't the case. When he mentioned that the boss would be back soon and they could take a break, he asked what she was up to. Siola replied that an order for tofu had come in, and since they were out of it, she was going to prepare some herself. She pointed out that it didn't sell much anyway, and that it was technically Kim's job. He thought about it for a second and realized she wasn't wrong, but then noticed she was about to start cooking the tofu. He immediately shouted for her to stop. Siola, not understanding why he was reacting like that, looked at him in confusion. Before she could say anything, Kim rushed over to shield her from the hot oil, getting his arm and back burned instead. The first thing he did was turn down the heat, and once he managed that, a heavy silence fell over the kitchen. He looked at Siola and asked if she was out of her mind. Why was she doing something he hadn't asked her to do? But then he realized he was yelling and apologized. It hadn't been his intention to scold her like that. He explained that he was just scared she might get hurt, since fire and knives were dangerous. He wasn't trying to be harsh. He just wanted her to be more careful. Even so, Siola looked disheartened. Kim regretted grabbing her and getting her messy, but before he could say anything else, she apologized and ran out of the shop without another word. Kim stayed there, feeling like he had completely messed everything up. As Kim stood in silence, still thinking everything had gone wrong despite his efforts to prevent it, he had no idea how to handle Siola's explosive temperament, especially now that she had stormed off. But when he heard the door open, he thought she had come back, only to see it was Sooyeon. She asked why he was just standing there, noticing how exhausted he looked. Kim lied, saying he was just stretching. Still, he wanted to ask how her trip had gone. Sooyeon thanked him for the thought, but her real concern was Siola's whereabouts. She asked if Siola was in the restroom. Kim, unsure of how to respond, said he thought she had stepped out for a bit. But Sooyeon noticed his uneasiness and asked directly if something had happened between them while she was gone. Kim tried to deny any issue, but his reaction gave him away, and Sooyeon knew for sure something had gone wrong. She assumed Siola had caused a problem, but Kim insisted it wasn't anything serious. At that moment, the door opened again, and Siola walked in, looking tired and clearly surprised to see her mother there. Wasting no time, Sooyeon asked her if she had mistreated Kim again, and why she was always like that with him. Siola, not even understanding what her mom meant, was about to reply when Kim interrupted. He couldn't stay silent while watching his boss scold her so harshly. He stood up for Siola, saying she had worked really hard that day, and that the shop bore her name for a reason. At that moment, Siola turned to Kim and handed him a bag. She then told Sooyeon that now that she was back, there was no reason for her to stay. She had a meeting to attend. When they checked the bag, they found several medications inside. That made Sooyeon think their relationship might be stronger than she had imagined. Later, Sooyeon told Kim that if something serious like that ever happened again, he had to let her know. But Kim simply apologized and assured her it wasn't a big deal, just a small mistake. While they were working, Sooyeon didn't think it made sense to minimize it, especially since Kim had been splashed with hot oil. Still, to Kim, it was just a minor incident. However, Sooyeon felt guilty and apologized, convinced that it was all her fault. She thought that if she had been there, none of this would have happened. Kim didn't understand why she was blaming herself, but he was grateful to Seolha, as she was the one who had brought the necessary things to treat his burns. He felt more at ease, as at first he thought Seolha had been angry, but he never imagined she would buy something for him. Now he was wondering if, after all, Seolha finally saw him as someone close. Upon hearing this, Sooyeon felt relieved and was happy that Kim worked with her. She would always be grateful to him. Then she asked if he thought Seolha would be willing to get to know him better. But Kim, instead of answering, kept looking at the dog he was carrying, questioning why he was doing that at a moment like this when the atmosphere was so pleasant. He scolded himself, as he wasn't usually like this. But after everything that had happened, every time he saw Sooyeon, he felt the urge to pray. Moreover, the outfit she was wearing suited her so well, which distracted him even more. He tried to focus, But then the girl asked if she should give him a kiss as a reward for his effort. Kim, though aware that Sooyeon often made such jokes, also understood that she was just trying to maintain a normal relationship with him. Normally, he would have laughed at the situation, but this time, he felt like he couldn't hold back any longer. When Sooyeon asked him why he didn't say anything and reminded him that it was just a joke, he ended up giving her a small kiss. Though surprised, Sooyeon let herself be carried away by the moment. Meanwhile, in Kim's mind, he had finally done it. Her charming appearance was too much to resist. However, soon after, he apologized for his sudden action. Sooyeon, instead of responding right away, asked him to close the shop first since she was going to go to the bathroom. Later, while they were organizing the mass, Kim couldn't help but tell Sooyeon that she looked even prettier in her outfit. She laughed and asked if that was why the chalice was glowing, but they would only have one mass that day as a reward for being with Seolha. Kim, however, simply replied that if she kept this up, he would end up eating the danonino while finishing the Bible. He then asked how far he was allowed to read. Sooyeon thought he just wanted to clean the chalice like last time, but she asked him to wait a moment. She remembered doing the same thing when they were in the magical village and asked if that behavior was normal for him. Kim apologized, but seeing his boss so innocent, trying to joke and acting carefree, only made him wish to pray by her side. That's why he apologized again. He couldn't contain his faith anymore. He liked her too much. His words made Sooyeon blush. Kim continued confessing that he thought he could endure it, but even though their relationship had improved since then, every time he saw her, he wanted to kiss her again and go out with her. He knew how hard Sooyeon had tried, but he simply couldn't take it anymore. He then reminded her of what Siola had said, that he wasn't any different from the others. Sooyeon agreed with him, saying that Kim was just following what his heart felt. However, she wanted to know what he really wanted to do, as she didn't know how to act and was waiting for his response. Kim, after a brief silence, apologized for what he was about to do. Sooyeon, confused about what he meant, looked at him. He mentioned that he should pay her back for her expensive shoes, but she assured him it wasn't a problem, as they weren't that expensive. Just as Kim was about to start reading the first paragraph, he suddenly stopped and asked what they would do without the rosary. Sooyeon only looked at him embarrassed, telling him that even though he was so skilled at work, he was completely clumsy with these things. She scolded him for not checking beforehand and asked if he planned to go buy one. However, she reassured him that it wasn't a problem. They would just have to use the holy water outside of their souls. In that moment, Kim began his first prayer, leaving Sooyeon completely speechless. Meanwhile, he wondered if it was really okay to pray without a rosary. Still, he felt the spiritual connection was stronger than ever, refreshing even. Together, they prayed for their well-being. Sooyeon asked Kim how he had managed to endure all this time. She meant it seriously, knowing he thought about it every time he saw her. She joked that he was clearly just a very introverted part-time worker, but Kim denied it, saying he wasn't that way at all. Instead, he turned the question on her, teasing that maybe the real pervert was her. After all, she was showing off her doggy attitude to the coworker she worked with. He even pointed out that her soft moans had been audible at times, though she hadn't noticed. Admitting it, Sooyeon blushed, realizing that perhaps she really was a bit of a Kim then started reading the Bible even faster, leaving her speechless. Unfortunately, in the middle of his rapid reading, he accidentally used the holy water outside of the soul without warning. Realizing his mistake, he immediately apologized and rushed to help clean up the mess. When he asked if she was okay, Sooyeon already knew that a simple ceremony wouldn't be enough for him. Later, as they continued with the ceremony, she questioned how she ended up changing clothes in that very place. She was also aware that just one consecration wouldn't be enough. Kim, on the other hand, noticed his faith had increased, but she shrugged it off, saying she had always been like that. It was just in her nature. That made Kim wonder if, deep down, they were the same. They continued praying for each other's well-being, even if the setting wasn't exactly ideal. During the prayer, Sooyeon asked Kim how he ended up falling in love with someone like her. But what truly bothered her was how close he had seemed to Siola earlier that day. Before she could say more, Kim kissed her to stop her from talking. Then, looking her in the eyes, he asked why she was even bringing that up. He liked her, not Siola. He had fallen for Sooyeon because she was kind and hardworking. When she finally processed his words, all she could say was that he sure said sweet things. Kim, seeing that was all she could respond with, didn't push further. Instead, he returned to reading the Bible, now even faster than before. Sooyeon asked what he was doing and demanded he put her down. But Kim asked if she was afraid. She said no, just embarrassed that she might feel heavy. Kim, being honest, told her she felt lighter than the boxes of ingredients he usually carried. Holding her while reading wasn't a big deal. That left Sooyeon without a reply. And though Kim also felt a little flustered, he asked her what she thought of his skill, or if she just didn't enjoy praying beside him. She admitted he was right. It wasn't really her thing and suggested they stop doing consecrations from that point on. But Kim showed her a new yoga pose and asked what would happen if he said no. He was enjoying it so much now that stopping the reading felt impossible. He even asked if they'd continue having masses, or if she'd fire him for it. Sooyeon had no choice but to let it slide. At that moment, Kim blushed too much and grabbed 2 pieces of bread she had nearby, eating them quickly before returning to the sacred readings. It was then that he felt it was time to end the ceremony, so he went to get the holy water, but accidentally spilled a lot on Sooyeon. Still, she chose not to say anything, not wanting to ruin the moment. Later that evening, after they closed the shop, Sooyeon praised Kim for his hard work, and he returned the compliment. But she pointed out that in the end, they hadn't served a single customer and had to close early. She asked if he was truly happy about that, to which Kim could only apologize. She reassured him that it was fine. They made that choice together. Even so, she reminded him that if anyone had seen them, they might have thought Kim was forcing a ceremony. What she meant was clear. They shouldn't be doing that inside the shop. It was still a place of business. The answer left the boy speechless, so he asked if it would be all right to do something while they were outside. A little nervous, he admitted he'd like to have dinner together or hang out at a cafe. He even mentioned finding a restaurant he wanted to visit and asked how she'd feel about going with him, but said he'd understand if she wasn't interested. Sooyeon, slightly flustered upon hearing his proposal, admitted that if it was really what Kim wanted, there wasn't much she could do about it. So she accepted the invitation. A while later, Kim was visibly blushing, scolding himself for making that kind of suggestion. It was basically a date. And to top it off, they had held a consecration inside the store, which felt rushed. He started wondering if he was losing his mind. Even though he knew he shouldn't think that way, every time he looked at Sooyeon, he felt overwhelmed. He questioned whether he was doing the right thing. His boss didn't seem mad, but he wasn't sure she was entirely okay with it either. Overthinking wouldn't give him the answer, so he decided to focus on his dinner. He'd eat his pizza once he got home. For now, he just wanted to enjoy a pleasant outing with his boss. That's when he noticed someone standing outside his building. As he got closer, he realized it was Seolha. She asked why he was getting home so late, pointing out his shift had ended a while ago. Kim, surprised, wondered why she was waiting for him outside his place. But then he noticed her eyes were on the pizza he was carrying, clearly assuming he had money. He denied it, explaining it was just a special meal he treated himself to once a month. Still, he cut to the chase and asked if she'd come in person to talk about what happened at the shop. Just as he was about to apologize, Siola cut him off. She admitted feeling guilty that he had burned his arm because of her, and felt she hadn't apologized properly since her mom arrived earlier than expected. To Kim, there was no need to worry. He was fine, and he blamed himself for not being more careful in the kitchen. He then asked if she had really waited outside just to say that. Seolha nodded, explaining that she hated owing people, especially fools like him who might hold it over her later. But now that she'd said what she needed to, she said goodbye. Noticing he was carrying food with his injured arm, she figured he wasn't doing that bad and simply wished him a good meal. Kim couldn't stop thinking about whether Siola had really come just to apologize. It seemed like she'd waited almost 30 minutes, exactly the time it took him to buy the pizza. He also remembered that she had brought him ointments and bandages he couldn't afford on his salary. From his point of view, he was the one in debt. So, he called out to her again. Since she was still nearby, he asked if she wanted to share some pizza. The atmosphere grew tense. Siola wasn't even sure he was speaking to her. Nervously, Kim tried to explain himself, telling her not to get the wrong idea. He reminded her that she had brought him the first aid supplies, and he just wanted to repay the favor because he felt a little guilty. Though deep down, the situation felt weird. Siola looked at him and asked if he was out of his mind. Why would she eat pizza with him? But just then, her stomach growled loudly, cutting her off. After a brief pause, slightly embarrassed, she asked what kind of pizza he had bought. Sometime later, Kim and Siola were sitting in his apartment eating pizza. Even though there was still a lot left, she hadn't said a single word the entire time. It was obvious she was hungry. She was eating fast. Since she hadn't spoken since arriving, the silence began to feel awkward for Kim. He decided to break the ice by commenting that his place was a bit messy. Siola took a sip of water and replied that, yeah, he probably should clean up a bit. Then a question crossed her mind. She asked Kim if the reason he kept working there was because of the boss. Seeing his startled reaction, she took it as a yes. Kim, slightly puzzled, asked why she was bringing that up. or if maybe that had been her intention all along. Siola replied that he should have figured it out already. The boss and she weren't exactly the most organized people at work, which was why every part-time employee before him had quit in less than a month. Even though Sooyeon seemed like someone who just smiled without thinking too much, she was actually quite reserved. That's why even those who approached her with other intentions eventually gave up. However, Kim didn't back down and kept moving forward. To Seolha, that was strange. In a way, she expected him to be a typical player, so she asked if he liked Sooyeon that much. She admitted Sooyeon was pretty, but she couldn't understand why he was still around. Kim had no idea what she meant. He reminded her that he had already said it before, but he'd repeat it if he had to. If he were like everyone else, he would have quit a long time ago. Seolha had no idea how many complaints he had received about messed up orders. To her, it was just routine. But Kim went on. Liking the boss was one thing, work was another. Every time he saw her, he was reminded of his dad, who had to raise him alone since he was a kid. He didn't know much about parenting, but he hoped Seolha could understand how hard it was to raise a child alone. He admitted the boss could be so clumsy at times it made him want to run away. But whenever he saw her trying so hard, he just couldn't tell her he was going to quit. Sometimes when she didn't have time to eat after work, she'd cook for him instead, which helped him out too, since he wouldn't know where else to find food that good for free. That made Seolha fall silent. Kim, for his part, worried he'd been too blunt, but he couldn't just avoid the topic. He also mentioned that missing the deadline for university re-enrollment had been entirely his fault. And for the kind of job they had, having someone with experience was better than starting over with a new hire. Seolha couldn't believe it. She had never seen someone so careless they forgot the re-enrollment date. In his mind, Kim agreed with her. But at least now, she saw him as a real person. Still, he acknowledged he wasn't all that different from the guys Seolha usually talked about. It wasn't his intention, but he couldn't help thinking about the consequences of his actions. And if he really thought about it, it felt like he was deceiving her somehow, and that made him uncomfortable. He didn't want to go through the same with Sooyeon. That's when he noticed his pizza was gone. He'd only had one slice. When Seolha realized she was eating the last piece, she offered it to him. But Kim encouraged her to finish it. She commented that she hoped he wouldn't regret that decision. In Kim's mind, he imagined this must be what parents feel like when they say they're full just to let their kids eat more. Suddenly, something caught his eye, and a second later, he screamed in fear. Startled, Seolha asked what was going on. Kim, still panicked, pointed and begged her to get it, even promising her 2 pizzas if she did. To Seolha, his reaction was exaggerated. It was just a bug. She grabbed some tissue paper to take care of it, and Kim thanked her like she had just saved his life. When the danger passed, Kim looked at her like a hero, but Seolha told him not to be so dramatic. She asked what kind of man screamed like that over a bug the size of a fingernail. Even her mom wasn't that scared of insects. Kim, offended, asked what being a man had to do with it. But just remembering that it could fly gave him chills. His heart nearly stopped when it landed on his shoulder. He was convinced bugs had evolved just to be as disgusting as possible to humans. Seolha couldn't help but laugh. Then she told him he should probably clean his apartment if he wanted to avoid more bug problems. She said goodbye, but before leaving, she mentioned she had enjoyed the pizza. Kim stood there, completely red-faced. He'd never seen her smile like that before. The next morning, Sooyeon and Kim were cooking when Seolha walked into the shop. She handed her mom her phone, which she had forgotten. At that very moment, Sooyeon had been wondering where she left it, so she was a bit surprised to get it back. She wondered if Seolha had really come all the way there just to return it, especially since she usually came by even without a reason. Seolha also brought a bit of coffee. Then she turned to Kim and addressed him directly, asking why he couldn't even say hello properly. Though he greeted her immediately, she brushed it off, saying to forget it because she had to go anyway. That's when Sooyeon noticed there were 2 cups of coffee and figured one must be for Kim. She found that interesting and asked what had happened between the two for them to become so close after just one day of working together. Kim denied it right away, but Sooyeon wasn't buying it. So Kim was honest. He supposed they were closer now. After all, when they worked together, Seolha had put in real effort. She only acted tough, but deep down she was a good person.